The last sliver of twilight clung to the horizon, painting the sky in hues of bruised plum and softest rose as Elara drove into Oakhaven. The air, crisp and tasting of salt and distant pine, was a balm to her weary soul. For months, her life had felt like a muted watercolor, colors faded, edges blurred. But here, in the quiet embrace of this coastal town, a faint vibrancy seemed to stir. Oakhaven wasn't bustling. It was a place that hummed, rather than roared. Old fishing boats, their paint peeling like sunburnt skin, bobbed gently in the harbor. Cottages, with their mismatched windows and gardens bursting with hardy sea lavender, clung to the cliffs like barnacles. It felt ancient and timeless, a place where stories settled into the stones and the wind carried secrets across the waves. Elara's destination was the Shell House, a small, sturdy cottage perched on a rise overlooking the main street. Its weathered clapboards a soft, sun-bleached blue. It had belonged to her grandmother, a woman whose memory was a comforting whisper in Elara's mind, a scent of warm vanilla and old books. After the whirlwind of the past year, the unexpected loss, the subsequent unraveling of her own carefully constructed life, inheriting the cottage felt less like a burden and more like a gentle, insistent invitation to breathe again. Parking her old hatchback, its trunk still crammed with boxes, Elara took a moment to simply exist. The rhythmic sigh of the ocean was the only sound, a lullaby promising peace. She unlocked the front door, the key turning with a rusty protest, and stepped into a world frozen in time. The scent of her grandmother, faint but unmistakable, enveloped her. Dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight filtering through lace curtains. Everything was exactly as she remembered it. The worn Persian rug, the mismatched teacups on a hanging rack, the small, sturdy wooden table where her grandmother used to sketch. Elara was an illustrator, her world one of intricate lines and vibrant colors, but lately, her sketchbook had remained stubbornly blank. The thought of picking up a pencil felt like an impossible task. She ran her hand over the smooth, cool surface of the wooden mantelpiece, a small smile playing on her lips. Here, perhaps, she could find her way back to the quiet joy of creation. She spent the first evening simply unpacking essentials, a change of clothes, a toothbrush, her grandmother's old journal. The cottage had a small wood-burning stove, and soon a comforting warmth spread through the main room, chasing away the chill. She made herself a simple cup of tea, the clinking of the kettle echoing in the stillness, and sat by the window, watching the moon cast a silver path across the inky sea. The quiet was profound, a stark contrast to the relentless noise of the city she'd left behind. It was a silence that didn't feel empty, but rather full of the ocean's song, the rustle of leaves, the distant cry of a gull. It felt like coming home to a place she hadn't known she was missing. Sleep came easily, a deep, dreamless slumber she hadn't experienced in months. When she awoke, the sun was already high, streaming through the east-facing window, painting the walls in cheerful gold. Elara stretched, a feeling of lightness surprising her. Today, she would explore. Oakhaven revealed itself slowly, like a shy bloom opening to the sun. The main street was a charming collection of independent shops. A bakery whose scent of warm bread wafted down the street. A small general store that seemed to stock everything from fishing lures to artisanal jams, and a bookstore crammed with paperbacks and local histories. Elara felt a spark of her old self, a quiet curiosity she hadn't known was dormant. She found herself drawn to the harbor, where the air was thick with the smell of brine and fresh fish. Lobster pots were stacked neatly, and gulls wheeled overhead, their cries a constant soundtrack. Beyond the main cluster of shops, nestled slightly apart, was a building that intrigued her. It wasn't a shop, not exactly. More of a large workshop, its wide double doors open to the street, revealing glimpses of sawdust and the gleam of polished wood. A hand-carved sign, faded by sun and sea, read the Driftwood and Dreams Workshop. Curiosity tugged at her. She needed a small, sturdy shelf for her art supplies in the cottage, something that would fit the rustic charm. Perhaps this place could offer a solution. She stepped inside, the scent of cedar, and something else, something warm and earthy, filling her senses. The workshop was a treasure trove of half-finished projects and gleaming tools. Sunlight poured in through grimy windows, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air. There were old wooden furniture pieces, some stripped down to their raw beauty, others lovingly restored to a soft sheen. A partially built boat frame dominated one corner, its graceful curves already hinting at its future on the waves. A man was bent over a workbench, his back to her, deeply engrossed in his work. He wore a faded denim apron, and his dark hair was a little long, falling over his forehead as he focused. His hands, strong and capable, moved with a practiced grace, sanding a piece of wood. The rhythmic rasp of sandpaper was the only sound. Elara cleared her throat, feeling a little intrusive. The man straightened slowly, turning towards her. He was taller than she expected, with kind eyes the color of a stormy sea, framed by a network of laugh lines. A faint smudge of sawdust dusted his cheek. He had a quiet intensity about him, a stillness that was both calming and deeply compelling. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a low, melodic rumble like the distant surf. "Oh, I hope so," Elara replied, a little flustered. "My name's Elara Vance. I just moved into the shell house, my grandmother's cottage. I was hoping to find a small shelf, perhaps something custom-made for my art supplies." His gaze softened, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his lips. "The shell house, eh? Lily's place. She was a wonderful woman." His eyes held a gentle recognition, as if he knew her grandmother well. "I'm Finn. Finn Alistair, but most folks around here just call me Whis." "Whis? Why?" The name felt like a gentle caress on the air, perfectly suiting his quiet demeanor. Elara found herself smiling back, a genuine, unforced smile. "Whis," she repeated softly, testing the sound. "It suits you." He chuckled, a warm, low sound that seemed to chase away any lingering awkwardness. "So I'm told, a childhood nickname that stuck. You're an artist then, Elara." His eyes, perceptive and curious, rested on her for a moment. "An illustrator," she confirmed. "Or, I used to be. Hoping to find my way back to it here." "Oakhaven's good for that," Whis said, gesturing vaguely around the workshop. "Plenty of inspiration. What kind of shelf are you looking for?" They spent the next 20 minutes discussing wood types, dimensions, and finishes. Whis listened attentively, offering suggestions, his knowledge of his craft evident in every thoughtful word. He sketched a quick design on a piece of scrap paper, his movements precise and efficient. Elara found herself captivated, not just by his skill, but by the quiet passion that radiated from him. There was a sense of deep contentment in his work, a feeling she longed to rediscover in her own. "I can have something ready for you by the end of the week," Whis finally said, looking up from his sketch. "No rush, of course. Just pop in when you have a moment." "That would be wonderful, thank you, Whis," Elara said, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't just the prospect of a new shelf. It was the easy, comfortable interaction, the feeling of being seen and understood without a need for elaborate explanations. As she left the workshop, the scent of wood and the memory of his quiet smile lingered with her. Oakhaven was slowly revealing its charms, and Wiss's seemed to be one of its most intriguing. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that Elara hadn't realized she craved. Mornings were spent in her grandmother's small garden, coaxing life back into neglected rose bushes and discovering hardy perennials peeking through the overgrown weeds. Afternoons were for exploring Oakhaven, finding hidden paths to the beach, discovering tide pools teeming with tiny creatures, and sketching in a small leather-bound notebook she now carried everywhere. Her pencil, once heavy and hesitant, began to move with a tentative lightness, capturing the sway of the seagrass, the intricate patterns on a forgotten shell, the play of light on the water. She visited the local library, a charming little building overflowing with books and the scent of old paper, where she was warmly greeted by Mrs. Gable, a woman with a quick wit and an even quicker smile. She bought fresh fish from the harbor, baked bread from the bakery, and found herself exchanging pleasantries with the shopkeepers, each interaction weaving her more deeply into the fabric of Oakhaven. And then, there was Whis. Their encounters were frequent, yet never forced. She'd spot him at the market, choosing the freshest vegetables with a discerning eye, and they'd exchange a smile and a few words about the weather or the day's catch. She saw him walking along the shore, a solitary figure, sometimes picking up pieces of driftwood, sometimes just staring out at the vast expanse of the ocean, a contemplative look on his face. She even found him one afternoon carefully mending a broken bird feeder outside the general store, his concentration absolute. Each time their conversations would deepen, moving beyond polite pleasantries. Elara learned that Whis had grown up in Oakhaven, that his family had run the workshop for generations. He spoke of the wood with a reverence that was almost poetic, describing the grain, the history, the stories hidden within each piece. He was restoring an old fishing skiff for a local fisherman, and he invited her to see its progress, explaining the delicate process of steaming and bending wood. "It's about finding the soul of the piece," he'd said, his voice soft as he ran a hand over the smooth curve of the boat's hull. "Bringing it back to life, letting its inherent beauty shine through. Not changing it, just coaxing it." Elara, in turn, found herself opening up to him about her art. She showed him some of her early sketches, tentative studies of the Oakhaven landscape. He looked at them with genuine interest, his gaze thoughtful. "You capture the quiet beauty," he observed, his eyes meeting hers. "The things people often miss." His words were a gentle encouragement, a balm to her still fragile confidence. One blustery afternoon, a week after her initial visit, Elara found herself back at the Driftwood and Dreams workshop. The new shelf was ready. It was perfect. Solid oak, beautifully finished, with a subtle grain that echoed the patterns she saw in the tide pools. "It's even better than I imagined," she said, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "Thank you, Whis." He gave her a modest smile. "My pleasure, Elara. Let me help you carry it back to the cottage." He followed her up the winding path to the shell house, carrying the shelf with an easy strength. Inside, he surveyed the room, his gaze lingering on the partially unpacked boxes and the bare walls. "Mind if I?" he asked, gesturing towards the shelf. "Please," she encouraged. "I'm not exactly handy with a drill." He worked efficiently, his movements precise and quiet. The shelf was soon securely mounted on the wall, ready for her art supplies. As he packed away his tools, he paused, his gaze falling on the small, worn armchair by the window, the one where her grandmother used to read. "This chair," he said, his voice a little softer than usual. "Lily always sat here, said it was the best spot for watching the gulls." Elara felt a pang of nostalgia. "She did. I remember her telling me stories while sitting right there." Whis nodded, a faraway look in his eyes. "She taught me a thing or two about listening, about the rhythm of the sea. Said it had a way of whispering truths, if you knew how to hear them." He turned back to her, a hint of a playful glint in his eyes. "That's partly where the nickname came from, you know. My granddad used to joke I could hear the whispers of the wood, too." Elara laughed, a genuine, joyful sound. "The whisperer of Oakhaven, then." "Something like that," he admitted, a blush creeping up his neck. He paused, then gestured towards the window, where the sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in soft oranges and purples. "The sunsets are particularly good from this spot. If you ever have a moment, I know a place down by the old lighthouse where the light catches the water just right. It's truly something." It wasn't an explicit invitation, but it felt like one, a gentle offering. Elara's heart fluttered, a sensation she hadn't felt in a long, long time. It was a soft, hopeful flutter, like the wings of a butterfly just emerging from its chrysalis. "I'd like that very much, Whis," she said, her voice a little breathy. "Very much indeed." He met her gaze, his stormy sea eyes holding a warmth that sent a shiver of anticipation down her spine. "Good," he said, a quiet contentment in his tone. "Perhaps tomorrow evening, if the sky promises to be clear?" "Tomorrow evening sounds perfect," she agreed, a genuine smile spreading across her face. As he left, the scent of wood and the lingering warmth of his presence filled the shell house. Elara walked over to her new shelf, running her fingers over its smooth surface. It wasn't just a shelf, it was a promise. A promise of new beginnings, of rediscovered creativity, and perhaps of a quiet, heartwarming connection in this town of whispers and dreams. She looked out at the sea, the gentle waves rolling in, and felt a profound sense of peace. For the first time in a long time, she felt like the colors in her life were beginning to return, vibrant and true. And she knew with a comforting certainty that this was only the beginning. She spent the rest of the afternoon arranging her art supplies, the faint scent of turpentine and linseed oil now mixing with the clean, woody aroma emanating from the new shelf. It wasn't just a physical space, it was a mental one too. A clear, uncluttered surface awaiting new inspiration. She found herself smiling, a soft, genuine curve of her lips she hadn't seen in the mirror for far too long. The next few days were a blur of rediscovery. with the shelf prominently displaying her most cherished, though unfinished, pieces: a half-painted lighthouse, a charcoal sketch of gulls caught mid-flight, a small clay sculpture of a sleeping cat. She felt a renewed vigor. The blank canvas on her easel no longer mocked her. It beckoned. She started with colors, vibrant blues and greens mirroring the ocean outside her window, then moved to the subtle grays and purples of the dawn sky she'd watched from her new home. Each brushstroke felt lighter, freer, less burdened by the weight of past expectations. The shelf, in its quiet presence, seemed to hum with encouragement. But even as her artistic world blossomed, a small, persistent thought lingered: the woodworker. Elias. His name, spoken softly by the gallery owner, had stuck in her mind. She found herself wondering about his hands, so skilled and precise, about the quiet intensity in his eyes. She wanted to thank him properly, not just with a hurried exchange of words. And perhaps, she admitted to herself, she simply wanted to see his workshop again, to breathe in that earthy, comforting scent of wood and honest labor. A week later, with a batch of freshly baked ginger snaps tucked into a small basket, she found herself walking along the cobbled path towards his workshop. The air was crisp, carrying the salty tang of the sea and the sweet, lingering scent of honeysuckle from a nearby cottage garden. She felt a flutter in her stomach, a nervous excitement that was both unfamiliar and strangely pleasant. The workshop door was ajar, a sliver of warm golden light spilling onto the path. The gentle hum of machinery, rhythmic and reassuring, could be heard from within. She hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open a little further, the small bell above jingling softly. Elias looked up from a large piece of oak he was sanding, his movements fluid and focused. Sawdust clung to his dark hair, and the sleeves of his worn denim shirt, catching the light like tiny golden motes. He straightened slowly, his eyes, the color of deep sea kelp, widening slightly in surprise as they met hers. A small, genuine smile touched his lips, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Hello?" he said, his voice a low rumble, surprisingly warm. He wiped his hands on a rag, leaving faint streaks of wood dust. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Hello, Elias," she replied, her voice a little breathier than she intended. I wanted to thank you properly for the shelf. It's absolutely beautiful. More than I imagined. It's made a difference." She held up the basket. "And I brought you these as a small token of my appreciation. They're still warm." He took the basket, his fingers brushing hers for a fleeting second, sending a jolt of warmth through her. "Ginger snaps?" "My weakness," he chuckled, his gaze softening. "You didn't have to, but thank you. That's very kind." He gestured towards a small, clear space on a workbench, pushing aside some tools. "Come in, please. It's a bit dusty in here as always." She stepped inside, feeling immediately at home amidst the organized chaos. The scent of wood was even stronger here, a complex symphony of cedar, pine, and oak. Tools gleamed on hooks, wood shavings lay in soft piles on the floor, and unfinished pieces of furniture stood like silent sentinels, awaiting their transformation. "It's wonderful in here," she said, genuinely impressed. "It feels alive." He smiled, a quiet pride in his eyes. "It is for me. Every piece of wood has a story, and I just try to help it tell it." He picked up one of the ginger snaps, breaking it in half. "Perfect. Thank you again." He took a bite, his eyes closing for a moment in appreciation. "So, the shelf is working out? You said it made a difference." She nodded, a wave of ease washing over her. "More than you know. I'm an artist, a painter mostly, and I've been, well, stuck for a while." The shelf, it was like a sign, a physical representation of a fresh start. It's helped me find my way back to my easel. Elias listened intently, his gaze unwavering. "An artist? I thought perhaps. There was something in your eyes, a way you looked at the grain of the wood when you were here last. A keenness." He took another bite of the ginger snap. "So, colors are returning to your life, as you said." She met his gaze, surprised by his memory of her words, and felt a blush creep up her neck. "They are," she admitted softly. "Thanks in no small part to a certain beautifully crafted shelf." He chuckled again, a deep, resonant sound. "I'm glad to hear it. It's a good feeling, bringing something to life, whether it's with paint or wood. Do you ever sell your work here in town?" I haven't yet, she confessed. I'm just getting back into it, but perhaps soon. There's a small gallery, isn't there? The one where I first saw your work. Yes, Marion's gallery, he confirmed. She has a good eye. I display a few pieces there from time to time. He paused, then almost shyly added, I'd like to see your work sometime, if you'd be willing to share it. If it helped you find your colors again, I imagine it must be quite something. Her heart skipped a beat. The idea of him seeing her art, her most vulnerable creations, was both daunting and thrilling. I'd like that, she managed, a genuine smile gracing her lips once more. Perhaps if you're ever not buried in sawdust, you could come by. My cottage is the one with the blue shutters, just past the old lighthouse path. I know it, he said, a knowing twinkle in his eyes. I walk that path often. I'll keep that in mind. Thank you again for the ginger snaps. They've brightened my afternoon. As she walked back along the path, the sea breeze tousling her hair, she felt lighter than she had in years. The conversation had been easy, comfortable, filled with an unspoken understanding. It wasn't just the shelf that was a promise, it was Elias himself, a quiet, steady presence that seemed to fit perfectly into the emerging landscape of her new life. True to his word, a few days later, Elias appeared at her cottage door, not buried in sawdust, but still smelling faintly of wood and fresh air. He carried a small, intricately carved wooden bird, its wings outstretched as if caught mid-flight, crafted from a warm, reddish wood. I was walking by, and I thought of something, he said, holding out the bird. A small thank you for the ginger snaps and a little inspiration, perhaps, for an artist. She took the bird, her fingers tracing the smooth, polished curves of its form. It was exquisite, a testament to his skill and thoughtfulness. Elias, it's beautiful, she breathed, genuinely touched. Absolutely exquisite. She looked up at him, her eyes shining. Please, come in. Her cottage, unlike his workshop, was filled with light and color. Canvases leaned against walls, some finished, some still works in progress. Paints in tubes and pots were arranged on a long table by the window, and brushes stood like soldiers in ceramic jars. The shelf he had crafted held pride of place, displaying a newly finished painting of a dramatic sunrise over the ocean, its hues vibrant and full of life. His gaze swept around the room, taking it all in. This is wonderful, he said, his voice hushed with admiration. He stopped before her easel, where a new piece was emerging, a portrait of the old lighthouse, seen through a gentle morning mist. You truly have a gift. He moved closer to the shelf, his hand reaching out to touch the frame of the sunrise painting. And this is magnificent. The way you've captured the light, the movement of the waves. It feels like the sea is right here in the room. A warmth spread through her chest. To have her art seen and truly appreciated by someone whose own craftsmanship she admired so deeply was a profound joy. Thank you, she whispered, feeling a tremor in her voice. It's been a long time since I felt this connected to my work. I understand that, he said, turning to face her, his eyes serious. Sometimes the flow stops, the well runs dry, but it always comes back, doesn't it? Especially when you're meant to create. They talked for hours that afternoon, sitting by the window that overlooked the sea. They spoke of the challenges and rewards of creation, the way inspiration could strike unexpectedly, the satisfaction of seeing an idea take tangible form. She told him about her journey, obliquely hinting at the past heartbreak that had dulled her world, without delving into details. He listened with a quiet understanding, his gaze steady and empathetic. He spoke of the unique character of different woods, the patient process of shaping them, the joy of creating something beautiful and functional. There was a shared language between them, a deep resonance that transcended mere words. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, "Thank you for sharing your world with me," he said, his voice soft. "It's beautiful." "Thank you for visiting, Elias," she replied, holding the wooden bird. "And for this, it will have a special place on the shelf." After he left, she found herself lingering by the window, watching the last vestiges of twilight fade into night. The wooden bird sat nestled amongst her art supplies, a silent testament to the warmth that had filled her cottage. She realized that she hadn't just rediscovered her art. She was rediscovering herself, piece by quiet piece. And in Elias, she found a gentle mirror, reflecting back a part of her she hadn't known was missing. Their encounters became more frequent, each one a thread woven into the tapestry of her new life. Sometimes he would drop by with a small offcut of wood, a unique grain he thought she might find interesting for a still life. Other times she would bring him sketches she'd made of his workshop or the tools of his trade, which he would examine with a thoughtful hum of appreciation. They found themselves meeting for coffee at the small cafe by the harbor or taking long, quiet walks along the beach, the rhythmic crash of the waves a soothing backdrop to their unspoken thoughts. One breezy afternoon, as they strolled along the shoreline collecting sea glass, she found herself opening up a little more. "I came here to escape mostly," she confessed, skipping a flat stone across the water, from a life that had become colorless, a relationship that had drained everything out of me, including my art. Elias listened, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "It takes courage to start over," he said quietly. "Especially when the world feels like it's lost its vibrancy. But the colors were always there, weren't they? Just waiting for you to see them again." He picked up a smooth gray pebble and offered it to her. "Sometimes, you just need a new perspective, a different light." She took the pebble, its coolness a comfort in her palm. "And sometimes," she added, looking at him, "you need a beautiful shelf and a kind woodworker to help you find that light." He met her gaze, a gentle smile playing on his lips. "I'm glad I could help, even in a small way." He paused, then continued, his voice a little softer. "I understand what it feels like to lose your way. My own path hasn't always been straightforward. There were times I doubted if I'd ever pick up a chisel again after some things fell apart." He didn't elaborate, but the quiet admission hung in the air between them, a shared vulnerability. It was enough. She didn't press for details, sensing the unspoken pain. Instead, she simply reached out and gently squeezed his arm. "But you did," she said, her voice full of quiet understanding. "And you make beautiful things." That moment, on the windswept beach, felt like a turning point. Their connection deepened, moving beyond shared interests to a mutual, unspoken empathy. They understood each other's quiet struggles, their deep-seated need to create, and the solace they found in their respective crafts. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in shades of rose and lavender, Elias invited her to his workshop. "I'm finishing a new piece for Marian's gallery," he explained, "and I'd value your artistic eye before I send it off." She arrived to find him sanding the final touches on a small, exquisitely carved table, its surface gleaming like polished amber. He stood back, wiping his hands, and gestured for her to approach. "It's breathtaking, Elias," she said, circling the table. The craftsmanship was flawless, the lines elegant, and the wood seemed to glow from within. "It has such a presence. It's more than just a table. It's a sculpture." He watched her, a pleased expression on his face. "I tried to capture the feeling of the sea, the way the waves curve and flow." He then led her to a corner of the workshop she hadn't noticed before, a small alcove bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp. There, meticulously arranged on a smaller, rough-hewn shelf, were a series of miniature wooden sculptures. A tiny, perfect sailing ship, a lighthouse no bigger than her thumb, a school of fish caught in a perpetual dance. And amongst them, nestled carefully, was a small, empty space. "I've been working on a few things lately," he said, his voice softer, inspired by the return of some colors. He looked at her, his eyes holding a warmth that made her heart flutter. "I was hoping perhaps you might consider painting something to fill this space. Something small, something inspired by the sea, by this town, something that captures the feeling of new beginnings." Her breath hitched. The request was more than just a commission. It was an invitation, a gesture of profound trust and connection. To have her art displayed alongside his in his most personal space filled her with a joyful sense of belonging. I would be honored, Elias," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. "More than honored." The days that followed were filled with a quiet energy. She spent hours in her studio, sketching ideas for the miniature painting, her mind humming with inspiration. She thought of the sea, its endless cycles of ebb and flow, its constant promise of renewal. She thought of Elias, his quiet strength, his gentle understanding, and the way he had helped her find her path again. The painting she finally created was small, no larger than a silver dollar, but vibrant with life. It depicted a tiny boat, sails unfurled, heading towards a distant, sun-drenched horizon, a single seagull soaring above. It was a symbol of journey, of hope, and of the courage to embrace the unknown. When she presented it to Elias, he held it in his calloused hands, his eyes tracing every delicate brushstroke. A slow, heartfelt smile spread across his face. "It's perfect," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Absolutely perfect." He carefully placed it in the empty space on his shelf, where it settled as if it had always belonged there. As she looked at her painting nestled amongst his carvings, a profound sense of peace washed over her. The colors in her life weren't just returning. They were intertwining with new, vibrant hues, creating a landscape she had never dared to imagine. She knew with a comforting certainty that this quiet town, with its whispering sea and its kind woodworker, was not just a place of new beginnings, but a place where her story, in all its colorful glory, was truly just unfurling. The shelf in her cottage, the wooden bird, the tiny painting in his workshop, each was a silent testament to a connection growing deeper, stronger, and more beautiful with every passing day. And she knew, with a comforting certainty, that this was only the beginning. And she knew with a comforting certainty that this was only the beginning. The canvas on her easel seemed to hum with new possibilities. The little wooden bird sat on her windowsill, a silent, graceful guardian, and across town, she knew, a tiny painting nestled amongst wood shavings. Elara felt a surge of creative energy, not just for her art, but for the life unfolding around her. The next morning, fueled by strong coffee and an even stronger sense of purpose, she found herself sketching furiously, capturing the way the morning light slanted across the old fishing boats in the harbor, the intricate patterns of dried seaweed on the beach, and the particular gentle curve of a piece of driftwood she had found. But as her charcoal danced across the page, a different image kept forming in her mind's eye. Liam, his hands dusted with sawdust, his brow furrowed in concentration, the quiet strength in his gaze. Later that week, a light drizzle softened the edges of the world. Elara, wrapped in a cozy shawl, decided to brave the weather. She had an idea for a new series of smaller pieces, depicting the town's hidden corners and a need for some custom frames. Who better to consult than Liam? The bell above his workshop door chimed a cheerful, slightly rusty tune as she pushed it open. The scent of pine and cedar, warm and inviting, enveloped her. Liam was at his workbench, sanding a piece of wood so smooth it gleamed even in the muted light. He looked up, his smile, always a little slow to bloom, warming his eyes. "Elara," he said, his voice a low rumble that always seemed to settle something in her chest. "To what do I owe the pleasure on such a gray day?" "Frames mostly," she admitted, holding up a small portfolio of sketches. "But also, perhaps, a cup of tea, if you're offering." He chuckled, wiping his hands on a worn apron. "Always. Kettle's just boiled." As he poured the tea, steam curling invitingly, Elara spread her sketches across a cleared section of his workbench. They talked about the nuances of wood, the way different grains could complement a painting, the subtle art of a perfectly metered corner. He listened intently, offering thoughtful suggestions, his fingers occasionally tracing the lines of her drawings with a gentle respect that she found deeply touching. "These are beautiful, Elara," he said, picking up a sketch of a gnarled old tree clinging to a cliff face. "You capture the soul of things." Her cheeks flushed slightly under his gaze. "And you, Liam, give them a home." She pointed to a detailed sketch of a tiny forgotten alleyway, rich with history. "For this one, I'm thinking something dark, perhaps walnut, but with a surprising inner bevel, almost like a secret window." He nodded, already envisioning it. "A challenge I'd welcome." He paused, then looked at her, a hint of something deeper in his eyes. "You know, I'm making a new cutting board for Mrs. Henderson next door. She always leaves me a slice of her apple pie. If you were around later, there's usually enough for two." Elara's heart gave a little skip. "I might just take you up on that, Liam." That evening, the workshop was transformed. The work lights were dimmed, replaced by the soft glow of a single lamp near the small, worn table in the corner. Mrs. Henderson's pie was indeed delicious, its spiced warmth a perfect counterpoint to the drizzly evening outside. They talked for hours, not about wood or paint, but about the rhythm of life in their quiet town, about the books they'd read, the simple joys of a perfectly brewed cup of tea. The way the sea changed its mood with the tide. Liam spoke of his father, a shipwright who had taught him the reverence for wood and the patience required to coax beauty from it. Elara shared stories of her travels, the vibrant markets, the bustling cities, the wild landscapes that had inspired her, and the quiet yearning for a place to truly belong that had ultimately led her here. I used to think belonging was about a place, a postcode, Elara mused, swirling the last drops of tea in her mug. But I think it's more about feeling seen, isn't it? Truly seen. Liam met her gaze across the table, his eyes soft and understanding. I think you're right, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. It's about finding the people who see you, even the parts you didn't know were there. A comfortable silence settled between them, punctuated only by the distant murmur of the sea. Elara felt a profound sense of peace, a feeling of coming home that resonated deep within her bones. Over the next few weeks, their casual visits became a cherished routine. Elara would often drop by Liam's workshop with a freshly baked scone or a thermos of her special herbal tea, finding him absorbed in a new project. She'd watch him work, mesmerized by the quiet precision of his hands, the way he seemed to communicate with the wood, coaxing its natural beauty to the surface. He, in turn, would sometimes appear at her cottage, a small, perfectly carved wooden something, a miniature lighthouse, a smooth, polished pebble of oak, or a tiny, perfectly rendered leaf, in his palm ostensibly to discuss a frame, but lingering to watch her paint, his presence a comforting anchor in her vibrant world. One blustery afternoon, a fierce gale swept through the town, rattling windows and tearing at the shingles of older roofs. Elara's cottage, charming as it was, bore the brunt of many years of sea air. A persistent drip started in her small attic room, threatening her stored canvases. Panic began to set in. She wasn't handy in the slightest. Before she could even think of calling a repairman, there was a knock on her door. Liam stood there, rain slicking his dark hair, a toolbox in one hand, a small bag of groceries in the other. Heard the wind howling, he said, a faint concern in his eyes. Thought I'd check if everything was holding up. Elara felt an immediate wave of relief wash over her. Oh, Liam, thank goodness you're here. There's a leak in the attic. Without a word, he set down the groceries, a loaf of fresh bread, some cheese, and a bottle of wine, and headed straight for the attic stairs. He spent the next hour clambering on the roof, securing loose tiles, and reinforcing the weak spots, while Elara watched from below, a warm mug of tea clutched in her hands, a knot of worry gradually loosening in her chest. He came down, drenched and slightly muddy, but with a triumphant if weary smile. Should hold for now, he announced, wiping his hands on a cloth. Might need a proper look when the weather calms, but no more drips for tonight. Elara felt a rush of gratitude so strong it almost brought tears to her eyes. Liam, how can I ever thank you? He just shrugged, his eyes crinkling at the corners. It's what neighbors do, isn't it? Now, how about we make good use of that bread and cheese, and perhaps that wine? They sat by her crackling fireplace that evening, the storm raging outside, a cozy cocoon of warmth and companionship within. The simple meal felt like a feast. Elara found herself sharing more about her past, the loneliness she'd often felt despite being surrounded by people, the sense of always being an observer rather than a participant in her own life. I ran away from a lot, I suppose, she admitted, swirling the red wine in her glass, watching the firelight dance. From expectations, from a kind of suffocating perfection. I wanted to find a place where I could just be. Liam listened without interruption, his gaze steady and comforting. When she finished, he simply reached across and gently covered her hand with his. His touch was warm and solid, a silent reassurance. This town, this sea, it's a good place to be, Elara, he said softly. And you bring your own kind of vibrant life to it. His words, so simple and sincere, filled a quiet space within her that she hadn't even realized was empty. She looked at his hand covering hers, felt the calluses of his work, the warmth of his skin, and a deep, unfamiliar tenderness bloomed in her chest. As the weeks turned into months, their connection deepened, woven into the very fabric of their days. Spring edged into summer, painting the landscape with wildflowers and longer, brighter evenings. They began to explore the town and its surroundings together. A Sunday morning stroll along the cliff paths, pointing out unique rock formations and seabirds. An afternoon spent foraging for wild berries in the nearby woods, Liam patiently showing Alara which ones were safe to eat. They discovered a shared love for old forgotten stories, for the history etched into the weathered stones of the town, for the way the salt spray carried the scent of distant lands. One particularly sunny afternoon, Alara was feeling a familiar creative block. She'd been commissioned to paint a series of abstract pieces for a new gallery in the city, but the pressure to create something important was stifling her usual free-flowing inspiration. She found herself staring blankly at a canvas, her brushes dry and neglected. Liam, sensing her quiet struggle, arrived at her cottage with a small, unassuming package. "Found this while clearing out some old timber from the harbor master's shed," he explained, handing her a piece of wood. It was an ancient, weathered plank, smoothed by decades of sea and sand, its surface a tapestry of pale grays and greens, with faint, almost illegible carvings etched into it. "It's beautiful," Alara breathed, running her fingers over its cool textured surface. "What is it?" "Part of an old fishing skiff, I think," Liam replied. "It spoke to me. Thought perhaps it might speak to you, too." He was right. The moment she held it, the block dissipated. She saw not a blank canvas, but the story within the wood, the quiet resilience of the sea, the whispers of the past. She started sketching directly onto the wood, using mixed media, incorporating the existing carvings into her composition, letting the natural imperfections guide her hand. She worked with an intensity she hadn't felt in months, and Liam would often sit in her studio, quietly reading a book or simply observing, his presence a soothing balm. He also had his own projects. He was working on a special commission for the town's small library, a new reading table carved from a magnificent old oak that had fallen in a recent storm. It was an ambitious piece, requiring meticulous joinery and a deep understanding of the wood's character. Alara found herself spending more time in his workshop, captivated by the evolving form of the table. She'd bring him lunch, or simply sit on a stool, offering her artist's eye when he needed a break, admiring the way the light caught the polished curves, the subtle sheen of the oiled surface. "It's like you're coaxing a song out of the wood, Liam," she observed one afternoon, tracing the smooth edge of a leg. He smiled, a rare open smile that made her heart flutter. "And you, Alara, you paint the music." Their conversations began to touch on deeper themes, on the future, on what they truly wished for. They spoke of the quiet contentment they found in their crafts, the satisfaction of creating something tangible and beautiful. But increasingly, their shared dreams began to include each other, subtly woven into the fabric of their words. One balmy evening, they walked along the beach as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and soft purples. The air was still, the waves a gentle hush against the shore. Alara felt a lightness in her step, a profound sense of peace. "I used to think I'd spend my life chasing the next big inspiration, the next grand adventure," Alara confessed, skipping a smooth stone across the water. "But lately I find the greatest adventure is right here, in the quiet moments." Liam picked up a shell, turning it over in his hand. "Perhaps," he mused, his voice soft. "The grandest adventures are often the ones we build, slowly, carefully, with someone by our side." He looked at her then, his eyes reflecting the fading light, a warmth and depth in them that made her breath catch. He took a step closer, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The air crackled with unspoken words, with a longing that had been steadily growing between them. Alara felt an irresistible pull towards him, a desire to bridge the small distance that separated them. She saw a flicker of the same yearning in his eyes, a mirroring of her own heart's quiet plea. Then, a sudden gust of wind, carrying the scent of salt and honeysuckle, swept between them, rustling her hair and bringing a playful chill to the air. The moment, fragile and beautiful, passed, leaving them both with a lingering awareness, a heightened sense of the unspoken. Liam cleared his throat, a hint of shyness in his gaze. "It's getting a little chilly," he said, though the evening was still mild. "How about we head back? I think I have some of Mrs. Henderson's shortbread left." Alara smiled, a little wistfully, but with a warmth that reached her eyes. "Shortbread sounds perfect." As they walked back, side by side, their shoulders occasionally brushing, Alara knew that the moment hadn't been lost, merely postponed. It was a promise, hanging in the twilight air, as real and tangible as the sea-smoothed stones beneath their feet. The town, with its whispering sea and its kind woodworker, had become more than just a place of new beginnings for Alara. It was a home, filled with stories waiting to be told, and a future waiting to be painted, piece by beautiful piece, with Liam right there, quietly creating his own masterpieces beside her. The shelf in her cottage, the wooden bird, the tiny painting in his workshop, the carved plank, each was a silent testament to a connection growing deeper, stronger, and more beautiful with every passing day. And she knew, with a comforting certainty, that this was still only the beginning. The mornings began to blur into a comforting tapestry of shared rituals. Elara would often find herself waking not in her own cottage, but in Liam's larger, sunnier home, the scent of fresh coffee already brewing, mingling with the familiar aroma of wood shavings from his workshop. He never spoke of it, but a softer blanket appeared on her side of the bed, and a specific mug, painted with a delicate wildflower design, was always set out for her. She, in turn, found herself leaving little traces of her presence: a vase of freshly picked meadow flowers on his kitchen table, a note tucked into his lunch basket, a new tea blend added to his pantry. Their creative worlds intertwined more deeply. Elara began sketching designs for Liam's carvings, her fluid lines lending a graceful whimsy to his sturdy forms. He, in turn, would prepare canvases for her, stretching the linen with a precise care that mirrored his own craftsmanship. They often worked side by side, Elara at her easel in his sun-drenched garden, capturing the play of light on his ancient oak, while Liam chipped away at a piece of walnut on his porch, the rhythmic tap-tap-tap, a soothing counterpoint to her brushstrokes. One blustery afternoon, a sudden gust of wind ripped through the village, tearing a section of roofing from Elara's cottage. She stood, aghast, watching rain begin to seep into her studio. Before she could even fully panic, Liam was there, a tarp slung over his shoulder, his expression calm and resolute. He didn't ask, he simply acted, clambering onto her roof, his strong hands expertly securing the temporary cover. As she watched him, silhouetted against the stormy sky, a profound sense of gratitude, deeper than any words could convey, settled in her heart. He was a quiet anchor in her often dreamy world, a steadfast presence she hadn't realized how much she craved until he was there, offering his strength without question. Later, huddled by her hearth with mugs of hot cider, the rain drumming softly on the tarp above, Elara found herself telling him about her childhood, about the transient nature of her early life, the constant moving, the longing for a place to truly belong. Liam listened, his gaze steady, his fingers absently tracing the grain of the wooden bird on her mantelpiece. When she finished, a vulnerability she rarely showed laid bare, he simply said, "Everyone deserves a home, Elara." His words, simple and unadorned, resonated with a depth that brought tears to her eyes. He wasn't just talking about a house. He was talking about a feeling, a belonging she was slowly, irrevocably, finding with him. As spring gave way to a golden summer, the village buzzed with preparations for the annual harvest festival. This year, the mayor had decided on a grand community project, a large decorative archway to welcome visitors, to be placed at the entrance to the village green. It was to be a collaborative effort, combining the talents of local artisans. Naturally, Liam and Elara were approached. "Liam, your skill with wood is unmatched," Mayor Thorne had boomed. "And Elara, your paintings capture the very soul of our village. Imagine what you two could create together." They accepted, a nervous excitement fluttering between them. This wasn't just a small shared project. This was a highly visible public collaboration, a symbol of the village itself. The archway was envisioned as a sturdy oak frame, intricately carved by Liam, with panels inset, depicting scenes of harvest and village life, painted by Elara. Their days became a whirlwind of shared creation. Liam's workshop, usually a sanctuary of quiet solitude, now hummed with a different energy. Elara's paints and brushes mingled with his chisels and mallets. They spent hours discussing designs, their heads close together over sketches, their hands occasionally brushing as they pointed out details. Liam would carve a cluster of oak leaves, and Elara would paint a tiny, vibrant ladybug crawling among them. Elara would depict a bustling market scene, and Liam would carve the intricate wooden stalls, giving them a three-dimensional life. There were moments of creative tension, of course. Elara, with her painter's eye for color and light, sometimes found Liam's pragmatic approach to structure a little rigid. Liam, with his carver's reverence for the natural form of the wood, sometimes found Elara's abstract flourishes a little. But these disagreements were always gentle. always resolved with compromise and a deeper understanding of each other's artistic philosophies. One afternoon, Elara was struggling with a particular panel, a depiction of the village baker, renowned for his sourdough. She couldn't quite capture the warmth of the oven or the flour-dusted joy on his face. Frustrated, she sighed, pushing her brushes aside. Liam, who had been meticulously sanding a section of the archway nearby, looked up. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice soft. "It's the baker," she admitted. "I can't get the light right. The feeling of his warmth, his generosity, it just looks flat." Liam walked over, studying her canvas. He picked up a small offcut of oak, a piece he had been smoothing for another purpose, and with a few deft strokes of his smallest carving tool, he began to sculpt. In minutes he had created a tiny, perfect miniature of a rustic bread loaf, complete with a beautifully carved, flour-dusted crust. He held it out to her. "Sometimes," he said, his gaze meeting hers, "the feeling needs to be held, not just seen." Elara took the tiny loaf, her fingers tracing its smooth, cool surface. It was more than just a carving. It was an embodiment of the baker's craft, his essence. A spark ignited within her. She realized he wasn't telling her to add the carving to her painting, but to understand the feeling behind it, the tangible warmth. She looked at him, a sudden welling of emotion in her chest. His quiet understanding, his ability to translate a feeling into a form, was profoundly moving. "Thank you, Liam," she whispered, her voice thick. "It's perfect." He simply nodded, a faint blush rising on his cheeks, and returned to his sanding, leaving her to find her inspiration. And she did. She painted the baker again, but this time, the light glowed from within, and the warmth radiated from his flour-dusted hands, not just from the oven. The harvest festival approached with a flurry of excitement. The archway, a magnificent testament to their combined artistry, stood proudly at the village entrance, drawing gasps of admiration from early visitors. Liam's strong, flowing carvings formed a sturdy embrace around Elara's vibrant, soulful paintings. It was more than just a collaboration. It was a conversation between wood and color, structure and spirit, grounded earth and soaring sky. It was, in essence, a reflection of them. On the opening day of the festival, the village green was a riot of color, music, and laughter. People milled around, admiring the stalls laden with local produce and crafts. But the centerpiece, undoubtedly, was the archway. Mayor Thorne beamed, clapping Liam on the back and shaking Elara's hand vigorously. "A triumph! A true triumph, you two," he declared. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Elara and Liam stood a little apart from the crowd, watching the last golden rays illuminate their creation. The air was filled with the distant strains of a folk tune, the murmur of happy voices, and the sweet scent of autumn leaves. "It's beautiful, Liam," Elara said, her voice soft, her heart full. "More beautiful than I imagined." "It's beautiful because of your colors, Elara," he replied, his gaze fixed on her face, not the archway. "They bring it to life." A comfortable silence settled between them, charged with unspoken emotions. The long days of shared work, the quiet meals, the knowing glances, the gentle comforts, it had all led to this moment, ripe with possibility. Elara's heart hammered a soft rhythm against her ribs. She turned to him fully, her eyes searching his. "Liam," she began, a tremor in her voice. I don't think I realized how much I needed a home until I found you. Not just a place, but a feeling." His strong, calloused hand reached out, gently cupping her cheek. His thumb stroked her skin, a feather-like touch that sent shivers through her. His eyes, usually so guarded, were open and vulnerable, reflecting the soft twilight. "And I," he said, his voice a low rumble, filled with an emotion that surprised even him. "I didn't know how much my home was missing until you filled it with your light, Elara. With your colors, your laughter, your gentle spirit. You make everything more beautiful." His words, simple and honest, were a testament to the depth of his feelings. Elara felt a wave of warmth wash over her, a profound sense of belonging settling deep in her soul. She leaned into his touch, her eyes brimming. "I love you, Liam," she whispered, the words a gentle exhale, a truth she had held close for too long. A soft gasp escaped his lips, and his fingers tightened on her cheek. Elara, he breathed, his voice hoarse with emotion. He leaned closer, his gaze dropping to her lips, then back to her eyes, seeking permission, seeking confirmation. Elara closed the small distance between them, rising on tiptoe as his head dipped. Their lips met, a gentle, hesitant touch that quickly deepened into a tender, profound kiss. It was not a kiss of fiery passion, but one of slow, blossoming warmth, of promises whispered without words, of two souls finally finding their way home to each other. It tasted of autumn leaves and quiet strength, of painted dreams and carved realities. It was everything she had ever longed for, wrapped in the comforting embrace of a man who saw her, truly saw her, and loved her for all her vibrant artistic spirit. When they finally broke apart, breathless and a little shaky, the stars had begun to pepper the darkening sky. Liam's eyes, still gazing into hers, held a newfound light, a joyful wonder. "Stay with me, Elara," he said, his voice firm with certainty. "Stay with me always. Make my home, our home." Elara smiled, a radiant, tearful smile. "Always, Liam." "Yes, always." The days that followed were filled with a quiet joy, a gentle unfolding of their shared future. Elara gradually moved her belongings from her cottage to Liam's larger home. It wasn't a rushed transition, but a thoughtful weaving together of their lives. Her vibrant canvases found spaces on his sturdy walls. His meticulously crafted furniture now held her collection of antique paintbrushes and delicate teacups. Her studio, once confined to her small cottage, expanded into a sun-drenched annex of his workshop, a place where the smell of turpentine mingled harmoniously with the scent of wood. They discovered new rhythms together. Mornings began with shared coffee on the porch, watching the mist lift from the valley. Evenings were spent by the hearth, reading aloud, or simply enjoying the comforting silence of each other's presence. They continued their individual crafts, but now with an added layer of inspiration, a shared muse. Liam carved a magnificent oak frame for Elara's grandest landscape painting, and Elara painted delicate wildflowers onto the wooden panels of a new hope chest he crafted for their bedroom. The little wooden bird Liam had carved for her still held its place on her mantelpiece, but now the mantelpiece was in their shared living room, a silent sentinel to their journey. The tiny painting he had kept in his workshop now hung proudly beside his workbench, a constant reminder of the colors she brought into his world. The carved plank, the first silent gift, was now part of a sturdy bench in their garden, where they would sit, hand in hand, watching the seasons turn. Their love story wasn't one of grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but of quiet moments, unspoken understandings, and the steady, unwavering strength of two souls finding their perfect fit. It was a love built on shared passions, mutual respect, and the profound comfort of belonging. One crisp autumn afternoon, as leaves rustled golden outside their window, Elara sat sketching by the fire, Liam beside her, gently polishing a new carving. She looked up from her sketchbook, her gaze falling on him, on the way the firelight caught the silver in his hair, the gentle curve of his smile. "You know," she said softly, "my favorite masterpiece isn't on a canvas anymore. It's here, this." She gestured around their cozy home, their intertwined lives. Liam looked at her, his eyes warm and full of love. "Mine too," he murmured, reaching for her hand. His fingers, rough from years of carving, intertwined perfectly with hers, soft from years of painting. And as the fire crackled warmly, casting long shadows across their shared home, Elara knew with a comforting certainty that settled deep in her soul, that this was not just a beginning anymore. This was a beautiful, enduring story, painted and carved, piece by precious piece, into the very fabric of their lives, a heartwarming testament to finding home in another's heart forever.